What a day that has been. I have just live streamed my niece's wedding on a couple of Panasonic GH5s over Zoom to family and friends who couldn't come here because of course it's 2020. If I have to explain why, you've been asleep. If you're interested in doing the same thing, you are going to want to watch this whole long video because I have broken new territory this week, learning painful lessons, but I've figured out how to do it. I'm at the chapel where my niece got married today. All in all, it was a roaring success. So I'm going to tell you how I did this and how I set the whole thing up. It's simpler than I expected, but also more complicated than I expected. So step one, I had help. This was really important. So there's Ethan 1, Ethan 2, and Caleb and myself, 4 of us to pull this off. Ethan 1, who was handling a one GH5 with a zoom lens, a 35 to 100mm f2.8 LUMIX lens, but he had the camera on a tripod, and he's not a filmmaker, but he just made sure that the camera was pointed where it needed to be pointed and zoomed in when he needed to be zoomed in and zoomed out when he needed to. Whilst my camera, which was roaming free, was handheld, was plugged into a different laptop. And Ethan 2 was manning my workstation. Now both cameras had to be plugged into a separate laptop each, and each of them had to be signed onto Zoom as their own separate accounts. And so the short version is that the cameras go into the laptop and then microphones separately plug into the laptop, and then you log on to Zoom, and both those accounts are in the Zoom meeting. And then Caleb, with a third laptop, was essentially setting up and hosting the entire Zoom meeting. Panasonic has just released its Livestream software, or the next upgrade. It released some Livestream software back in the summer, but they upgraded it in September very quietly, and nobody seems to know about this, and it was a major upgrade. It didn't work very well at first. You had to go in through OBS and then plug in to Zoom, and it was the delay was horrible, so you just got the voice and the audio and the video were just out of sync really badly. But now, if you go to the Panasonic website, you can go and download their free Livestream software, and it works for essentially Panasonic's professional level of cameras. So the GH5 and upwards, GH5s, and all the other ones that have just come onto the market. So when you go to the Panasonic website and download the Livestream software, I got really confused because I was looking for the software, because it used to open an actual software package on your laptop. It doesn't do that now. Now it's a plugin for Zoom. When your camera is connected to the laptop, when you open Zoom, you get this Panasonic LUMIX kind of screen that opens up just before your camera comes into view, and then essentially it just allows you to plug your Panasonic camera straight into Zoom. It's great. There are 2 things that you need to connect to the laptop in order to go live on Zoom with a DSLR type setup. The video and the audio, they're plugged in separately. When you connect your camera to the laptop, it's only the video feed that you can pull down. The audio has to be plugged into the laptop separately. At the moment, it's just it doesn't work within one cable. That'd be nice, and I'm sure at some point there'll be a way to just have one cable plugged in and you get audio and video, but for now it's separate, and that does add to the complexity. It's manageable, but be warned. So you're going to need a USB-C to USB 3 kind of connector, and for me, I bought a couple of 6-meter USB 3 extension cables, so that if necessary I could roam free or at least wander some distance from the laptops. I didn't know where we'd be able to position the laptops at the wedding and how far from the cameras, so long cables, and that's how they were connected. So once I downloaded the software from Panasonic, or once I'd connected the camera with these cables and switched the camera on, then I opened up Zoom, and you could test this out by just launching a Zoom meeting, and you should find yourself being able to see the same image that's coming through from your camera. It's brilliant. Now you should get a clean image coming through, meaning that you don't have all the usual stuff that when you look at the back of your camera, you've got exposure, shutter speed, ISO, blah, blah. There's a dashboard everywhere. A clean image that you should get straight through to Zoom doesn't have any of that, but it does have a few other things. You need to switch off focus peaking, otherwise everybody on Zoom will see your sparkly face that's in focus. And also you need to switch off exposure meter zebra patterns, otherwise anything that's slightly blown out, you get the little zebra lines and everybody on Zoom can see that. So you need to switch those off. Also bear in mind that this image comes straight out of the camera. You can't add a LUT onto this. It might be time to actually go into picture profiles, and I've never used any of the other picture profiles because I always deal with the image in post, but you might want to I chose the vivid picture profile just to make things a bit more interesting. Still playing around with that. For a wedding, I'm not sure it was the best choice, but it made things just feel a bit more vibrant and a bit less like just a normal looking camera. Once you have decided on your picture profile, once you've turned off the focus peaking and once you've switched off the zebra stripes, it's worth saving those settings as a custom profile on something like C1. If you look on the top of your camera, you'll be able to see C1, C2, C3. There are other YouTube videos that show you how to set a custom profile, but it's really, really simple. Once you've got everything set up, then you have to just go to into the menu, go to the place with the wrench bar, and I think it's second from the top on the first page is Cust menu. You click on that, and then there you kind of click on either C1, C2 or C3, 1, C3. Yeah, click the one you want, overwrite it, and then you've got it saved. That means that you can quickly go into basically Zoom mode with your camera. Really, really handy. So again, this only takes care of the video. For the audio, I had a couple of Rode Video Mic Go wireless microphones. I've got one on now, and they worked a treat, except my MacBook Pro, I love it. It's 2014. I love that MacBook Pro. And my wife's laptop that I also used for the other GH5, it was a 2014 MacBook Air. It doesn't have a separate audio interface. It has a kind of two-in-one audio, like headphones and speaker interface. In order to get a microphone in there, you need to get a splitter. And so I got two of these splitter cables, one for each laptop, and it basically splits off the feed into headphones and microphone. And you'll need to plug some headphones in so that it's connected. And then the microphone, I had such trouble with this. In theory, it's supposed to just plug straight in and you've got a live microphone. But I noticed it just didn't seem to pick up, it didn't seem to connect. I went into settings where you can look at sound audio settings and you can kind of test. When it's working, you should see external mic pop up rather than internal. That's what you're looking for. It needs to say external, and then you know that you've got the microphone. So I don't know why. Okay, this is where it turns into a little bit of a black art, some kind of, I don't know what was going on. I'm sure that there's an explanation, but I couldn't figure out what it was. So my workaround was that so I found that if I had a cheap microphone that didn't have any active electronics in it, so something that was just a passive microphone, and that did the trick, suddenly it came to life. Oh, and the other thing is, once you've plugged the microphone in, sometimes you have to unplug the main socket with the microphone and headphones out and plug it back in. It's almost like you're resetting everything by unplugging and plugging things in. So if it's not working, just keep trying to unplug and plug things back in, and eventually that's how I managed to get it to work. So first, I'm so sorry that this is complicated. So I kind of woke the whole thing up by putting a cheap microphone in first that had no active electronics in it, and that seemed to get the attention of the system. And then once I had an external feed, I unplugged that cheap microphone, and then I plugged in the Rode Wireless Go, and it seemed to hold. And sometimes it didn't, so I had to unplug the main kind of headphone microphone socket and unplug it and plug it back in. Again, I'm so sorry that this is complicated. It was faffy, but we got there. And in the end, I had two GH5s set up with two live feeds with the video and then two live audio feeds eventually. Little handy helpful hint here. When you are live in Zoom and you've got your headphones on and you're listening to what's going on, don't be freaked out if you can't hear anything through the headphones. Zoom has a very clever feature where when you're speaking, it actually disables your speakers, which avoids feedback. So you don't get this horrible whistling feedback loop going on. I didn't realize this. It's clever, it works a treat, but what it means is that if your camera is the one where the audio is live on the Zoom meeting, then you won't be able to hear it. Don't panic, because everybody else can. As long as you can see the dials, and as long as you can see on the little microphone bar, the little green thing flashing up and down to indicate that there is some audio, then don't panic. So once we had everything plugged in and set up, we logged into Zoom and we had a third person. This was Caleb. Thanks, Caleb. He had a borrowed professional account and he set up and launched and hosted the Zoom meeting. And then we both joined first, both the cameras joined before anybody else did. Now this allowed him to pin both of these participants, which was the two cameras, and then he could switch off the audio and the video for everybody else, and that really helped with bandwidth, so that the video feed, the quality was better, and he was able to get it so that you had two cameras side by side. And the only thing that we had to do then was switch microphones. You see, we had two microphones set up. One microphone was on the groom, was on Nathan. And that meant that I could pick up him and Beth, my niece, as they were kind of saying their vows. And the other microphone was at the podium where speakers were standing. So depending on whether Ethan 1 was filming somebody at the podium or whether I was filming the bride and groom, then depending on who was speaking, we could switch the audio to that microphone. But of course, the host of the Zoom meeting can't control that. He can only ask the other person to unmute their audio. So you had to have somebody manning both the laptops in order to unmute at the right time, so that you had the right microphone picking up the right activities, depending on whether it was at the podium or whether it was saying their vows. So we had two live feeds side by side, and that's what everybody saw. And by the way, the feedback was great. People really liked this. So there were some upsides and downsides to doing it this way. In a live broadcast environment, of course, you'd have somebody in an editing suite, kind of live editing, cutting between different cameras. Well, we didn't have somebody dedicated to do that. The upside is that it didn't matter which camera angle was going on. Everybody at home could kind of just look at the one that they were interested in. So it was okay, it was fine. The downside was that it meant that both cameras were live on air for a full hour. And it meant that you have to make sure that every camera movement is really smooth and is really fluid. Otherwise, people viewing it, they get seasick. It's actually really hard to do that for an hour if you're used to working with DSLRs, where you record something and then edit it later. Live cameramen will know all about this, but for those of us who are in a generation where we just never do like an hour's worth of live broadcast, this is a new skill to have to develop, keeping the camera steady. So you can either put it on a tripod, zoom in slowly, zoom out slowly, make sure it's in focus all the time, pan around slowly, up and down slowly, everything's slow and gentle, so nobody's feeling sick as the camera's moving around. So Ethan 1 on the tripod, that was great. For me, hand holding the camera, my goodness, the GH5 has in-body image stabilization, and that really helps. I had to just be really careful to be as smooth as I could with all my movements. For an hour, that's really tricky. It really starts to get to your wrists. And every time you try and readjust your handle, it jerks the camera around, and so you have to be really careful. It is really tricky to keep a handheld camera smooth and fluid for an hour. It's really hard. So if I was doing this again in the future, I'd probably invest in one of those vests and arm things and get my gimbal on it, so that it holds the weight. It's not so much that the camera's heavy, but if you hold anything for long enough, it starts to get heavy and you want to adjust your grip. And every time you adjust the grip, you knock the camera. So having the camera on a gimbal and on a vest for an hour, that's where that kind of thing is worth getting into. And they're pretty cheap now. They used to be like $5 grand. Now they've come down to just a couple £100 or something. But for the vest, then you just have a gimbal that you'd attach to it. The great thing about having a handheld camera was that I could be really fluid. I could move the camera into all the places that would get the best shots. Because there was only a handful of people in the audience, we didn't have to worry too much about me being center stage. Normally with a big audience, it'd be a bit weird to have the camera guy just like there, right with the bride and groom. But during COVID, during lockdown, when hardly anybody's allowed to go to a wedding, then we just made the most of it. So there I was kind of getting the camera into places that you wouldn't normally get a camera in the middle of a service. So it allowed me to do that. So it's really great having two cameras, one that's kind of locked off for a nice steady shot and one that allows you to go in close for little details and just get close. It created a much more intimate feel and let me get some really, really lovely shots. The other thing that I'd like to do in future, if ever I do this again, I don't know how long lockdown is going to carry on like this. So you never know what the future is going to bring. And by the way, we're at the bleeding edge of this new technology, and that's why everything's a little bit ropey at the moment. It's not that it's bad software and a bad setup, it's just that people are desperately trying to push the boundaries and the tech companies are trying to keep up. So we're getting there, but consequently everything's a little bit ropey. So here's the other thing that I would do. I think it's worth looking at a wireless image transmission unit. Like the Zhuin has a wireless image transmission module. Again, it would only give you the video feed, it wouldn't give you the audio feed as well. And if that I haven't tried it. If that works, then that means that you're not worried about tripping over wires, which apart from being a trip hazard, also means you could accidentally yank the cable out and lose the feed. So it's not ideal to have wires trailing around. But at the same time, the wire does give you an almost instantaneous feed, so there's very little lag between the camera going straight into zoom. And there's no real lag with the audio either, so it matches up reasonably well. My concern is that there might be a little bit more of a lag with a wireless transmission module, and the bigger the lag between the video and the audio, the more it starts to look a little bit awkward when people's lips are moving and the sound comes a moment or two later, you know. The battery's held up well, but make sure everything is well charged ahead of time. It's also really worth rehearsing the process of switching everything on and tuning in and getting logged onto Zoom. Last night before the wedding, we did this 3 times in a row. Kind of switch everything on, make sure we were all live, make sure it was all working, make sure we could hear everything, then switched it off. And we did that 3 times to make sure that we could repeat it. And then this morning, sure enough, when we tried to set it up, we did another test before we went live and there were problems. We sorted them out and it all went smoothly, but don't do this for the first time in the moment because you'll have problems. There are going to be problems and you'll be able to figure them out, but you need to practice this setup several times over with everybody involved before you actually go live at the event. On the gear front, this is my handheld camera. Now, I actually am really opposed to stupidly rigged out cameras just for the sake of it. I like to travel small, fast and light with as little gear as possible because I really don't like big rigged out cameras. That said, this year, I bought a second-hand GH5 and it came with, the guy sent me his small rig setup, which once I'd got it, I was like, oh, this is kind of handy. And then I started adding other bits on and other bits. I film my little girls at home a lot, my children. This is actually specifically set up for filming children. Children move a lot, and I wanted to get a shallow depth of field, so I really needed a wide aperture lens. And with that, you need to be able to focus in and out. You need to be able to do it manually. So this setup is for chasing children around who don't keep still and still getting them in focus with a shallow depth of field. It turned out to be really, really handy for today. So what I have here is a top rig, a top handle, and Small Rig has brought out one that has a red, it's got a record button on the top, which is really, really handy, because otherwise you're kind of, you've got everything balanced out there, then you've got to press record, then do this, and you've, at the end, beginning and end of every clip, you've always got the camera doing this, then you've got to kind of line it up again. Whereas with the record button right under your thumb, it's really, really handy. Well done, Small Rig. I have a side handle here, because this allows me to hold the camera here and balance the camera, which means that when I am turning the focus wheel, I'm not holding the weight of the camera. When it was just the focus wheel, every time I would turn the focus wheel, I was half carrying the camera and half turning, and it would destabilize the camera every time I did it. So now I've got the hand kind of goes on here on this handle, and I can ever so slightly move the focusing, and the focusing is really, really smooth, and it doesn't jolt the camera around all over the place. So that's kind of how I roll. This means that I can also have the camera a little bit lower, and I can move around quicker and it's actually quite a nice angle to work from sometimes. This fantastic thing from UU Rig, this is a filter holder for my variable ND filter. Really, 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 really handy. Really handy, honestly. If you use variable ND filters, UU Rig. It's so cheap. I mean, it's like, I don't know how much it costs. It's like 15 quid or something, and that brilliant little thing means that it's brilliant. My lens is I've got a Viltrox adapter, 0.71 times adapter, and I have a cheap Yongnuo 35mm lens that I have super glued a focus wheel ring around there, so that I can use it with a focus system. It's brilliant. It's a wonderful shallow depth of field for arty stuff. It's brilliant. And on the top, I have a field world monitor, which allows me to get a really good, clear image of what I'm looking at. It's really, really important when you're filming live to have a monitor that you've got a good vision of what you're filming, because you have to turn off focus peaking and focus assist rather, which means it makes it even harder to know whether you're in focus or not if you're shooting at like f1.4. F1.4 on here, the shallow depth of field looks wonderfully and dreamy for a wedding. It was great, but of course it's hard to work with, and you've got to be really, really good at nailing focus. So having a monitor means that you have a much better chance of nailing focus, even though you don't have any of the usual focus assist techniques. I've covered everything in my notes. There are probably some other things I've forgotten. All in all, that was a bracing day, but it went really, really well. Good luck if you're doing this. It can be done and it looks great, but not for the faint-hearted. But yeah, if please, honestly, look, I know I'd say this kind of thing just to get an algorithm boost, but in the comments below, if you shoot something, I would genuinely love to see it. So please paste a link, not for an algorithm boost, just because I want to see it, you know, if anybody else does this. So link in your YouTube video so I get to have a look and see how you did it. And if you've upgraded it and you've solved any of these other problems, you know, let me know in the comments below, because other people can read it as well. This is where the YouTube community becomes a little more useful, when other people can give hints and tips on what worked and what didn't. So thanks very much for watching. Flipping heck, man. Going home now.